Solution Series program titled Top 10 Trends Driving Demand and Location for Today's Data Center. My name is Sandy Hudson, and I will be your host. The Solution Series programs are available at no cost to NAIOP members. These mini webinars run less than 30 minutes, and our goal is to provide you with some quick tips and insights. All types of positive strategies and tactics to help you succeed in today's business environment. We encourage you to drive the content. Please send us an email to solutions@naiop.org to let us know what topics and presenters you would like to hear from in future programs. Please advance to the next slide. NAIOP has produced the popular Solution Series programs for over 2 years. Did you miss one of our informative topics? The archives of these programs are available to NAIOP members at no cost through the on-demand bookstore. Examples of past programs are listed on the current slide. Our topics cover finance, niche development, logistics, and more. Visit the NAIOP website at www.naiop.org/Solution Series for links to the archives. Please advance to the next slide. And now let's get on with our program. With us today is Paul Schlattman, Vice President, MCF Technical Principal with ESD. As a Vice President, he is responsible for business development, project administration, and strategic planning of data center, financial, co-location facilities, and other information technology-related projects. His responsibilities include business development, program management, information technology merger acquisition consulting, planning, data center consolidations, and project coordination. Paul has over 20 years of business development program management catering to Fortune 1000 companies nationally and internationally. Welcome, Paul. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Sandy. And I'd like to thank everybody for showing up today. Today's topic, obviously, is Top 10 Trends Driving Demand and Location for Today's Data Centers. Recently, there was a survey conducted within the IT industry, and it really catered to the CIO level executive and also real estate executive. And it was conducted by Digital Realty Trust, and the company that did this survey was Campus Research and Analysis. And the survey came out in February, and it was called Market Awareness and Profile Wave 5. And one of the questions, and we think there's a lot of validity to this survey, basically because the CIO levels that they conducted the survey with, out of 46% were from companies that were 5 to 20 billion, and then another 23% were above 20 billion. So we think that the survey has got a lot of weight to it. And one of the questions that was asked was reasons for expansion. And from that standpoint, there was 10 top reasons why companies were going to relocate or expand their data centers. Now we're going to really drill into the top 4. So I'm going to jump to 5 and go through 5 through 10 real quickly and then go back to the top 4. Number 5 is disaster recovery. Now, disaster recovery has been around for 20 years, right? And it's a necessary evil within organizations, but it also drives design and construction of new facilities, new data centers, right? And as Sarbanes-Oxley came about, which is, basically all of us having to keep our email and store that for 7 years because it becomes a legal document, it further increased the disaster recovery requirement and built larger DR-type facilities. Number 6 is new applications and servers. You'll probably see this one on this list every year. And specifically, it has something to do also with item number 3, virtualization, and we'll kind of come back to that. Number 7 is more square footage, which always seems to be the case. Companies are growing at a tremendous rate, and also there's other factors such as leases come due and things of that nature. So square footage, needing additional square footage always seems to be the case, even though that in many cases technology is shrinking. That requirement for new demand and location for square footage has always been around. Another item is 8, is the cooling issues, and that also relates kind of to number 4, power capacity, and 1, energy efficiency. Typically, data centers in the past were designed for 30 watts a square foot or 50 watts a square foot. And those data centers that have that design criteria cannot really support today's server. So it creates cooling issues among the data centers, so that's another reason. Number 9 is possible regs. Now, there's a couple different things that are going on. The EPA is going to be coming out with some new regulations concerning carbon, and so we're all kind of sitting back and kind of waiting for that. But a positive thing that's occurred is that depreciation on equipment within the data center is depreciable by 4 years now. And this is only for this year, and they're going to extend this policy for next year. But what that means is everything that's not a component of the building, such as your generator, your UPS, those type of things are depreciable. And so therefore, from a financial standpoint, it really makes a lot of sense. Number 10 is the internal cloud. A lot of major corporations are doing their own internal cloud. The cloud, we hear cloud every day. It's like, oh, cloud processing, this and that. But really, cloud really caters to companies that are 50 people, 100 people, not major organizations. However, internally, major organizations are looking to do some cloud applications across their organization worldwide. Another item that's not on here and was asked in the survey was containers. When you go to today's trade show for data centers, you see containers all over the place. I mean, that's the biggest promotion. That's the biggest hot item. However, when they asked the CIOs in this survey, only 2% said that they were going to planning on using containers, and out of that 2%, 80% said it was not a permanent solution. Just this morning, I got off the phone with the CEO of I.O., and they have a modular approach. It's not really a container. It goes inside of a building, but it's a modular approach, and it could be built inside of a building within a 90-day period. And that I see a real value to versus putting my containers outside or in a warehouse type environment where it's not protected from the elements. However, I think I.O. might be onto something, and we're going to watch for that in the future. All right, top 4 reasons. We have number 1 is energy efficiency. Number 2 is security. Number 3 is virtualization. And the 4th one is power capacity. These are the major drivers for demand for building new data centers today. Number 1 is energy efficiency. Now, when asked in the survey, there was asked, what is your PUE, right? And PUE stands for power usage effectiveness. And that means if I have 1 watt, that my server's putting out 1 watt of energy, it takes a certain amount of energy to cool that 1 watt and provide clean power to that 1 watt, right? So that's called a PUE. So the lower the number, the better your PUE. The national average right now is 2.8 for a PUE, which is absolutely terrible, right? We're designing data centers today at 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 PUEs, which are very reasonable to design that do not cost a lot of money. So that's a big driver in today's data center world. The second is new technologies. There's new technologies out from efficiency standpoint that really make you sit back and think, because the ROI, the return on investment, and the payback is a very short period of time. These technologies would be, for example, smart chillers. Smart chillers have an extremely low PUE. They're very efficient. We are able to get a lot of free cooling out of them. Other technologies that we like is the Mitsubishi UPS or Toshiba's UPS, which are really at 97% efficiency, whereas typically before UPS modules were at 93% efficiency. So we're actually getting payback from the equipment. The third item is DC power. We're seeing more companies migrating to DC power. This is a big savings. This is really like a 30%, 40% electrical savings. And what they're doing is some of the companies like Facebook, for example, they're stripping everything they absolutely do not need out of their server, therefore reducing the heat load within that server. So we're really beginning to see a lot of this within the financial industry. Industries that normally wouldn't do this are really looking to do this now. And then the 4th is free cooling, which is probably one of the hottest items that's within the industry right now. This is a map from ASHRAE, and it identifies various different regions in the country and what their temperature rating is. And so if you look at the green areas and the blue areas, these are very good areas for free cooling. Now, there are areas along San Jose that seem to be good, and up north in Seattle and Oregon that are very good. And those types of systems what we call airside economizers. However, when you get down into the Texas regions, free cooling can only be done with waterside economizers, and even then you don't get a lot of hours of free cooling. There's three types of economizers. You have a waterside economizer, which is a heat exchanger, which we connect to our chill water system, and it enables to give us free cooling depending on where you're at variable times of the year. So let's say in Denver, 93% of the time, you're able to get free cooling using a waterside economizer. It's also one of the cheapest methods for free cooling. The second is airside economizer, where we let fresh air in and condition that air and then put it in the data center. With airside economizers, you could see that they too are pretty effective in some regions, and it all depends on how warm you're running your chill water temperature. The third is the evaporative cooled economizer. These are very expensive systems, but they have a great return on investment. In Chicago here, we would be 93% of the time that we're able to use free cooling, whereas in San Jose, at 63 degrees, we would be at 87 up to 99. So as you can see, these are considerable savings when building data centers that we need to take account for. Number two is ranked security. Now there's two different types of security. We have what we call logical and physical. And the logical security is firewalls and things of that nature. But they don't really drive building data centers. That's just that they're constantly working with this level of security from hackers and the industry to better their firewalls. However, the big driver is disaster prevention criteria. If you look at the United States, we're kind of crippled in various different areas, right? We have seismic issues along the West Coast. Now, this has really become a problem after the Tokyo incident with their nuclear reactors. We have 4 nuclear reactors that are on seismic zones within California. Other areas of the country, obviously, are hurricane areas, and then we also have tornado alleys, and then there's other areas where we have a lot of snowfall. Weather is the #1 cause for power outages, and we'll kind of go into that in a little bit. So when looking from a disaster prevention standpoint, we really need to identify, okay, do we want to get out of these areas, and how do we protect? And that's a driver. Number 3, virtualization. This is a real hot item right now. In the past, we've had blade technology, right? And blade technology, when we deployed it, we would deploy like a half a rack full of servers, right? And we didn't have enough power or cooling to finish that rack, right? Well, now with virtualization, and we add it to those servers, it creates a really powerful tool for consolidation. Some of the things that happen when you do this is that prior, your server would only be utilized 9%. And now with virtualization, that same server is being utilized at 80%. So the industry came back and said, wow, this is really powerful now. So now when I completely load that rack, that's a real powerful tool. So what we're seeing is that prior, we would be at 7 kW per rack, let's say. Well, now we are at the same rack will be at 30 kW per rack, in which we bring chill water to the rack. Excuse me, I see I have a typo here with the megawatts per rack. That'd be a lot of power, wouldn't it? The existing infrastructure cannot support blade servers as it stands right now. So we're seeing companies building new data centers and consolidating. We just recently worked with a bank, and they consolidated 13 data centers into 15,000 square feet. And these data centers ran from 2,000, 5,000, 7,000 square feet, and they were running at PUEs of 2.8, not very efficient. So now we're able to take 13 data centers and put them in 15,000 square feet, operating at 1.4. So you can see the real value of where we're going with virtualization and blade. Now, my friend Abner Papachatos has got arguments, which I agree with, is that it's kind of like your computer. If you have a lot of different programs open, it runs slower. So in theory, we're using VM, your blade servers would not probably run as fast, but I think it's more of the benefit of the consolidation that's really driving it versus the operation. Fourth is huge, is power capacity. One, we have power capacity to serve VM blades. Again, our data centers in the past were not designed. They were 40 watts a square foot, 50 watts a square foot, 75. Now our data centers are minimum 150 and 200 is generally the average that we see. Some data centers, like the one I just told you about, the financial company, they were at 300 watts a square foot. So we're seeing a big drive within the power capacity area, which tells us, okay, let's take a look at the power grids itself, right? That's another issue that we have. This is a map that's put out by Eaton. And what they do is they monitor power outages throughout the year. And if you look at the states in red, these are the top 10 states that had power outages. The number one state was California. California last year had 540 power outages. Why would you have your data center? Right? It's absolutely terrible. The cost of power is high. If you look, Texas came in too. Texas is a big state, granted. They still had 150 outages. If you look over on the East Coast here, right, and look at all the states, specifically New York and others, North Carolina was in there, those states were on the same grid as the 2003 Eastern blackout, which tells us that they really haven't fixed the grid, right? So why would you want to be on the East Coast grid is the question that comes to mind. I know a lot of you, as specifically in the development side of things, are wondering, okay, how does my building fit in, and where are these data centers going to be built at? Okay. Now, this question was asked on the same survey, locations for expanded data centers. And here are like 13 of the locations they identified. I think there was 15 total. And one thing that happens within the industry is that companies like to be close to their servers. It's called server hugging. Tier 1 calls it server hugging, right? And you like to be close to your servers in the event of whatever happens. But the fact of the matter is you don't have to be. Those servers can be housed at various different places. Doesn't matter. But when they ask where they're going to build their data centers, they go to the highly populous areas of New York is number 1, Los Angeles number 2, right? And even though Los Angeles, we have earthquake and we have seismic, and you think, well, why would you do that? It's all based upon population. Number 3 is Chicago. In Chicago here, we have about a requirement of about 45 megawatts of power within the city here that we, from an industry, the IT industry, that's our demand here is about 45 megawatts. You also look at the San Francisco Bay Area, which has got a ton of data centers now, and they're just keep adding to the grid there, and you wonder, why they continue to do that. Also London, and London's been hot and will continue to be hot. And then there's Dallas, Atlanta, Phoenix, and then Mumbai. Seems like a lot of companies are considering going to Mumbai. India is a very young infrastructure, and so there's opportunities there. And then also Virginia, which is very built, and again, you're on the East Coast grid, and Paris, Denver, and Singapore. We see actually a lot of client requests that we have going into Singapore. So if you're in one of those cities, it's like, okay, what does my building need to have in order to support a data center? And there's like go or no-go items, right? And these are some of the go and no-go items. One is structural load. It's got to have 150 pounds a square foot. That's the minimum load. Now your batteries required sometimes 300 pounds, 350 pounds a square foot. There are also some server applications. Now we're migrating to blade. That's a heavier rack. So 150 has been the norm, but we typically like to see 175 pounds a square foot. The other is floor to ceiling height. Just because you can build data centers without raised floor doesn't mean you should. When you add raised floor, it adds a lot of flexibility down the line on your data center. It gives you opportunity for growth and various different cooling advantages, right? So we'd like to have floor-to-ceiling heights at minimum 14. We prefer to have them at 17, 18. That's why warehouses are good. Not Butler building warehouses, but warehouses that are made of precast. And in every case within a warehouse, if you consider making it a data center, you need to replace the roof, almost in every case. You also want to be close to a substation, right? I mean, most data centers that we're doing one for server farm right now. It's 24 megawatts of power. It's a lot of power. And the closer you are to that substation, the better. You need room for generators. You need room for cooling towers. And then there's disaster prevention criteria. No flood zones. They used to say railroads, but that's not actually so bad anymore because they have new specifications for chemical tankers that they don't leak as much if there's a derailment. So that's kind of going away from what I see. Flight paths, crime, obviously nuclear reactors, things of that nature. There are other site selection criteria factors that we need to consider. One is state incentives. A lot of states will still tax their server as a property tax, as a personal property tax to the company. So therefore, as they deploy servers, they're paying a pretty hefty tax on an annual basis. There are many states that have got incentives that don't do that. Indiana, Illinois, Michigan now doesn't do that. And so it's taken a while for states to adjust to this, but you want to make sure that the property tax incentives really apply. The other is the cost per kilowatt. New York, we were just discussing this morning, where it's going to 12 to 14 cents per kilowatt hour. Chicago's 8, which is very reasonable. If you go up to Oregon, they have a lot of hydropower, which is 2 and 3 cents, which is fantastic. That's always a big consideration of where to locate the data center. Also, the weather conditions, which we touched upon, seismic, tornadoes, things of that nature. Cooling considerations, which we also touched upon, whether it's dry, humid, moist, whatever those climate conditions are a factor. And then the history of the grid and the capacity of the grid. Again, I continuously go back to California. I love everybody out in California. But the fact of the matter is that you guys have more outages than anybody else by far. And so do you want to stay there is a big question. Now, within the major markets, let's say within Chicago, these are 3 of our clients right now. Within Chicago, we have a Market 1, which is an urban market, right? It's right in the city. And this project is a 440,000 square foot data center we're doing for a server farm. And they're really focusing on trading. There's 3 cities right now that are really hot in trading. That's New York, Chicago, and London, right? And so their biggest issue is that they need to be by the exchanges for trades. And therefore, latency is everything in the urban Market 1, right? So they're really catering to the trading market, and then enterprise users. Again, Chicago has 90 companies that are Fortune 500, so they're catering to enterprise, and then also cloud users. Cloud users need to be close to their client, right? So there's a lot of companies that are 50-people companies within the city of Chicago that they need to be close to. The second market that we have is kind of migrates out to the suburban market, and we call that market number 2. And it's got a little bit different clientele, and it's got a little bit different pricing, right? This is Lattice's. It's 147,000 square feet. We are upgrading that to a Tier 3 facility, which means it's going to be maintainable and up to 150 watts or more per square foot. And their client base is really enterprise users, because a lot of the enterprise companies in the city don't want their data centers in the city. They don't mind them having them out in the suburbs. They kind of like that. They also cater to the financial industry. And then they also have a lot of mid-sized users. Their average deployment is a 700 square foot cage, right? And a company coming in with 20 racks or 15 to 20 racks. And that's very common within Market 2 with Lattices. Then we have a third market, which is rural, right? It's 100 miles out of the city. And this is for data realty. And we are designing a 50,000 square foot greenfield data center, which will have 20,000 square feet of raised floor. And really what their focus is disaster recovery. They are perfectly located in South Bend, Indiana, between Chicago and Indianapolis. So they're going to have a primary focus with that. They also have a focus on medical. There's a lot of hospitals out there. And for hospitals building data centers, it's kind of a pain because, you know, it's not their core business, but it's a necessary evil. And so one of the key things is to actually do a colo scenario. And then they also have a good university sector down there with Notre Dame and other universities. So that's their target. So you have 3 within Chicago: Market 1, urban; Market 2, suburban; and the third, rural, that are within each city that you probably see, like New York, for example. You have downtown New York, and then their Market 2 is mostly New Jersey, for example. Their Market 3 is Delaware, for example. So you'll see that within the major cities. I also want to throw this out. This is long-term consideration, right? We think about this. Where are companies going to migrate to 10 years from now? All right. Within 10 years, a lot of things are going to change, obviously. But I really see getting out of California, because unless they do something miraculous with the grid there, and obviously there's seismic issues, and migrating to cooler climates and higher altitudes like Denver, Salt Lake City. eBay recently went to Salt Lake City. And so there's that. There's also companies migrating from trying to get better cooling, so like down in Texas, right? That aren't attached to their servers. Their server hugger mentality disappears, and they really process in other areas of the country. And then the other item that I think that we're going to see migration off of the East Coast grid and try to get on more reliable grids. Once again, my name is Paul Schlattman. I'm Vice President of the Mission Critical Facilities Group at ESD. I want to thank you for joining us today. Sandy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Paul, thanks for a great presentation and presenting the latest trends and their effects on where new data centers will be located and what the building requirements will entail. Our next Solution Series program will be available on October 25th. Watch your email for NAIOP source or corporate e-newsletter for the program link. Thank you for listening to our session and have